Samuel shifted the curtains slightly, peeking out at the white frost settling over the bare garden in Ashbourne, England. At 75, his days had become predictable and quiet. Every morning, he would tidy the small kitchen of his modest home, prune what remained of his garden, and occasionally take a slow walk to the nearby market. His life was a reflection of calm routines, but also of the solitude that had taken root since Margaret, his beloved wife, had passed away nearly a decade ago. The arrival of winter always sharpened that ache. The biting cold and long, dark evenings left no room for distractions. The photos on the mantel, Margaret smiling in their garden, Margaret holding a steaming cup of tea, seemed to glow more vividly in the dim light. Samuel often found himself pausing, lost in memories of her warmth, her laughter, and the way she made the old house feel like a home. This evening, the first real snowstorm of the year was forecasted. Samuel busied himself preparing, lighting the fireplace, layering the drafty windows with old blankets, and making a cup of Earl Grey. As the kettle whistled, he reached for his favorite mug, the one Margaret had painted with blue daisies during a pottery class. His hand lingered on the ceramic for a moment longer than necessary. Just as he settled into his armchair, the storm howling faintly outside, the sharp sound of the doorbell shattered the silence. Samuel frowned. Visitors were rare, especially at this hour, and especially in this weather. He placed his tea down carefully, the heat from the mug now forgotten, and shuffled toward the door. Pulling it open, he found himself staring into the snowy night. A young woman stood there, wrapped tightly in a thick scarf and jacket, her breath visible in the cold. It was Emily, his neighbor from 2 houses down. She looked nervous, almost hesitant to speak. "Mr. Hawthorne," she said, her voice tinged with urgency. I think there's something in your backyard." Samuel blinked at Emily, her words catching him off guard. "Something in my backyard?" he repeated, his voice rough from disuse. Emily nodded quickly, glancing nervously toward the side of his house. "Yes, I was walking home, and I heard noises, like an animal. I thought maybe it was hurt or... I don't know. I didn't want to ignore it." Samuel sighed, the warmth of his cozy chair already fading from memory. "All right," he muttered, grabbing his thick wool coat from the hook by the door. "Let's have a look." The icy wind slapped at his face as he stepped outside, the snow crunching under his boots. Emily followed close behind, a flashlight in her gloved hands. The backyard, bordered by a rickety wooden fence, was eerily quiet, save for the rustle of the wind through the skeletal tree branches. Samuel scanned the area, seeing only the familiar shapes of his old gardening shed and the barren patch of what had once been Margaret's flower bed. "Are you sure?" Samuel began, but Emily cut him off with a whispered, "There!" She pointed her flashlight toward the far corner of the yard. At first, Samuel didn't see anything unusual. Then the beam of light revealed a shadow, a large, trembling figure crouched low against the fence. As they moved closer, the shape became clearer. A horse. Its coat was tangled and matted with snow, the ribs visibly pressing against its thin frame. The horse raised its head slowly, its eyes reflecting the light with a wild, frightened glint. Samuel stopped in his tracks. "A horse? Here?" His voice was incredulous, almost disbelieving. Emily stepped beside him. "I think it's lost, or abandoned," she murmured. "But look, it's guarding something." Samuel squinted and took a hesitant step forward. The horse let out a high-pitched neigh, backing away slightly but staying firmly between them and whatever lay on the frozen ground. The animal's protective stance was clear, its body curling defensively around a small mound covered in frost. "Easy now," Samuel murmured, raising a hand in a calming gesture. But the horse wasn't having it. It pawed the ground and lowered its head as if ready to charge. "You should stay back," Emily warned, pulling gently on Samuel's arm. "It doesn't trust us." He nodded, though his eyes lingered on the animal. Something about the scene unsettled him deeply. What could a horse possibly be guarding out here in the dead of winter? Whatever it was, it had to be important enough to hold the animal in place, despite the biting cold and the visible strain on its frail body. "We can't leave it out here," Samuel said finally, his voice firm. He turned to Emily. "Can you bring some water and a blanket? I'll figure out what to do next." Emily hesitated, her worry evident. "Are you sure you'll be okay out here alone?" Samuel gave her a small, reassuring smile. "I've faced worse winters. Go on now." As Emily hurried off, Samuel stood rooted in the snow, watching the horse carefully. It shifted uneasily, its breath visible in heavy puffs. Samuel's mind raced. He couldn't leave the animal to suffer out here, but he also didn't know how to approach it without provoking further hostility. Whatever the horse was guarding, it seemed more precious to it than its own survival. Samuel shivered, his hands trembling, not from the cold, but from the enormity of what lay ahead. Back inside his small kitchen, Samuel rubbed his hands together, trying to bring warmth back into his chilled fingers. The snow on his coat had melted into damp patches, but his thoughts were too preoccupied to notice. Through the frosted window, he could just make out the shape of the horse in the corner of the yard, still standing guard over whatever lay on the frozen ground. He dropped into his chair, staring at the faint steam rising from his half-finished cup of tea. His mind was a storm of questions. Where had the horse come from? Why was it in his yard? And what, exactly, was it protecting so fiercely? The logical side of him said to leave it alone. He was 75, not young or strong enough to deal with a situation like this. But another part of him, the part that had spent years nurturing Margaret through illness, the part that couldn't bear to see anything suffer, refused to ignore the horse's plight. "Damn it, Samuel," he muttered under his breath. "You can't save the world." But as he said the words, he knew they weren't true. He couldn't just sit and do nothing. Samuel opened the pantry and scanned its meager contents. A few potatoes, some dry biscuits, a half loaf of bread. Nothing suitable for a horse. His eyes landed on a small bag of apples at the back of the shelf. Grabbing a knife, he sliced them into chunks and placed them in a bowl. If the horse was hungry enough, maybe it would let him come closer. Outside, the wind had picked up, whipping through the skeletal branches of the trees and sending icy gusts across the yard. Samuel winced at the cold, but trudged back toward the horse, his boots crunching against the snow. The animal noticed him immediately, its ears twitching and its nostrils flaring. Samuel stopped a good distance away, holding the bowl of apples in plain sight. "It's all right," he called softly, his voice steady despite the tension in his chest. "I'm not going to hurt you." The horse shifted nervously, its hooves pawing at the frozen ground. It glanced down briefly at the lump it was protecting before refocusing on Samuel. Samuel knelt slowly, placing the bowl on the ground and sliding it toward the horse with deliberate care. "Go on then," he coaxed. "You need your strength if you're going to survive this storm." For a long moment, the horse didn't move. Samuel held his breath, willing the animal to trust him. Finally, it took a tentative step forward, its movements slow and cautious. The horse lowered its head and sniffed at the bowl, then began to eat, crunching the apple slices with surprising vigor. Samuel let out a relieved sigh. Progress. But even as the horse ate, it kept one eye on him, and its body remained positioned protectively over the mysterious mound. Whatever lay beneath the snow, it was clear the horse wasn't ready to let anyone near it. Samuel stood slowly, not wanting to spook the animal. He needed to think. The storm was closing in, and the temperature was dropping fast. He couldn't leave the horse, or whatever it was, guarding out here much longer. As he retreated toward the house, Samuel resolved to try again. There had to be a way to help without scaring the horse away. He wasn't sure how much time they had, but one thing was certain. If he didn't act soon, none of them would survive the night. Samuel's mind churned as he stood in the warmth of his kitchen, staring out the window at the dim outline of the horse in the corner of his yard. The snow was falling harder now, thick flakes obscuring his view. The wind howled, rattling the old windows. The horse couldn't stay out there much longer, not in this weather. A plan began to form in his mind. He didn't need to move the horse far, just enough to get it some shelter. The old gardening shed at the back of the yard might not be ideal, but it was better than leaving the animal exposed. If he could lure it in, maybe he could figure out what it was guarding and finally take action. He grabbed a basket and filled it with more apples, adding a few carrots from the fridge. On impulse, he wrapped an old blanket around his shoulders, thinking he might use it if the horse allowed him close enough. With one last glance at the fireplace, its warmth beckoning him to stay inside, Samuel braced himself and headed back out into the storm. The wind was brutal, biting through his coat and numbing his hands as he gripped the basket tightly. The horse noticed him immediately, its head snapping up, ears twitching as he approached. Samuel stopped a few feet away, crouching low to show he wasn't a threat. "Easy there," he murmured, his voice almost lost in the wind. "I've got something for you." He placed the basket on the ground and backed away slowly, giving the horse space. The animal eyed him warily, but moved forward, drawn by the scent of the food. Its movements were slow and labored, its thin legs trembling under the weight of its body. Samuel's heart clenched at the sight. As the horse ate, Samuel crept closer, inch by inch. His goal was clear: get the horse to the shed. He scattered a trail of apples and carrots leading toward it, then waited, holding his breath as the animal sniffed the ground and began to follow the food. The plan worked better than he'd hoped. The horse hesitated at the entrance to the shed, but Samuel stayed back, speaking softly, encouraging it. Finally, with a heavy exhale, the animal stepped inside. Samuel moved quickly, closing the door partway to block the wind while still giving the horse room to see the outside. Only then did he dare approach the spot the horse had been guarding. The snow had piled high, and it took Samuel a moment to brush it away, his fingers red and clumsy from the cold. What he uncovered stopped him in his tracks. 2 tiny rabbits huddled together, barely moving. Their fur was damp, their small bodies trembling against the bitter cold. They looked impossibly fragile, their tiny breaths forming faint puffs in the air. Samuel acted on instinct. He removed his gloves and carefully cupped the rabbits in his hands, cradling them against his chest to share his body heat. They were light as feathers, their tiny eyes blinking sluggishly as they struggled to stay awake. "You've been protecting them this whole time," Samuel murmured, glancing back at the shed where the horse stood, watching him. He felt a wave of awe at the animal's determination. Despite its own suffering, it had refused to abandon the vulnerable creatures in its care. With the rabbits nestled securely against him, Samuel hurried back to the house, his boots slipping on the icy ground. Once inside, he set them down on a soft towel by the fire and covered them with another blanket. The warmth seemed to revive them slightly, and Samuel smiled as one of them let out a faint squeak. But his relief was short-lived. Out in the shed, the horse was still shivering, its frail body barely able to stand. It wouldn't survive the night without immediate help. Samuel knew what he had to do. Samuel didn't waste a second. The moment he saw the horse's weakened state through the shed's narrow opening, he knew that waiting for the storm to pass wasn't an option. The animal's breaths were shallow and labored, its legs trembling under its own weight. Time was running out. His old trailer, unused for years, was parked just beyond the house. If he could hitch it to his car and get the horse to the town's veterinary clinic, there might still be hope. The thought of driving in the storm made his stomach tighten, but he pushed the fear aside. There was no one else to call, no one else to rely on. It was up to him. Grabbing a sturdy rope and an old tarp, Samuel returned to the shed. The horse flinched as he entered, its head raising defensively, but it lacked the strength to put up much of a fight. "Easy now. Brave," Samuel said, the name slipping out without thought. "I'm just trying to help." The horse snorted softly, its ears twitching at his voice. Samuel approached cautiously, offering the last of the apples. As the animal chewed weakly, He looped the rope around its neck, careful not to pull too tight. The tarp went over its back, a poor shield against the cold, but better than nothing. The hardest part was leading the horse through the blinding snow to the trailer. Samuel's boots slipped on the icy ground as he tugged gently on the rope, his breath coming in heavy puffs. The horse stumbled but followed, its trust in him fragile but present. Finally, they reached the trailer. It took several tries and a lot of coaxing, but Samuel managed to guide the horse inside. Once it was secured, he closed the door against the biting wind and hurried to the driver's seat of his old station wagon. His hands shook as he started the engine, more from nerves than the cold. The drive to the veterinary clinic was a trial of endurance. The snow came down in relentless waves, reducing visibility to mere feet. The car's tires skidded on the slick roads, and Samuel's knuckles turned white as he gripped the steering wheel. He muttered prayers under his breath, glancing in the rearview mirror to ensure the trailer stayed attached. Just a little farther, he told himself, though he had no way of knowing if the clinic would even be open in this weather. The thought of failing, of the horse succumbing to the cold in the back of the trailer, was unbearable. He clenched his jaw and pressed on. When the warm glow of the veterinary clinic's lights finally appeared through the storm, Samuel nearly sobbed with relief. He pulled into the driveway, honking the horn twice before jumping out to alert the staff. A young vet and 2 assistants ran out, their expressions shifting from confusion to urgency as they saw the state of the horse. "Help me get him inside," Samuel called, his voice hoarse from the cold. The team worked quickly, unloading the horse and guiding it into the clinic's warm interior. Samuel followed close behind, his heart pounding as he watched them examine the animal. The vet, a woman in her 30s with steady hands and a calm demeanor, worked methodically, checking for injuries and signs of hypothermia. "He's in bad shape," she said after a tense few minutes. "Malnourished, dehydrated, and exhausted, but he's a fighter. We'll do everything we can." Samuel sank into a chair, his legs finally giving out. The adrenaline that had fueled him drained away, leaving only the weight of the night's events. He nodded silently, trusting the vet's words but unable to shake the worry gnawing at him. Hours passed, the storm raging outside. Samuel stayed in the clinic, refusing to leave until he knew the horse's fate. Finally, the vet approached him, her face tired but hopeful. "He's stable for now," she said. "You got him here just in time." Samuel let out a shaky breath, relief washing over him. The ordeal wasn't over, but for the first time that night, he felt a flicker of hope. Over the following days, Samuel found himself making daily trips to the veterinary clinic. The storm had passed, leaving Ashbourne blanketed in a thick layer of snow, but the roads were clear enough for him to visit the horse, whom the vet had officially labeled as Brave in the clinic's files. The name felt right to Samuel, perfectly capturing the animal's spirit. On his first visit, Samuel hesitated outside the examination room, unsure if Brave would even remember him. The vet, Dr. Collins, noticed his apprehension and offered a kind smile. "He's doing much better," she said, leading him inside. "Why don't you say hello?" Brave was lying in a spacious recovery stall, his body wrapped in thick blankets. His coat, now cleaned and brushed, revealed patches of chestnut brown, though his ribs still showed the toll of neglect. When Samuel stepped closer, the horse raised his head slightly, his ears twitching at the sound of Samuel's voice. "Hey there, Brave," Samuel said softly, his hand hovering awkwardly near the horse's head. "You gave me a good scare the other night." To Samuel's amazement, Brave leaned forward, nudging his hand gently. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. "He's starting to trust you," Dr. Collins said, her tone approving. "That's rare for a horse in his condition. Whatever you did that night, it left an impression." Samuel stayed with Brave for hours that day, sitting by his stall and talking to him about everything and nothing. He spoke of Margaret, of how she used to love the way the first snow of winter blanketed their garden. He spoke of the rabbits, now safe and thriving in a makeshift pen by his fireplace. Brave watched him the entire time, his dark eyes calm and attentive. By the third visit, Samuel noticed a change in himself. The cautious detachment he'd felt at the start had been replaced by something deeper, a sense of responsibility and connection. Brave wasn't just a horse to him anymore. He was a reminder of resilience and loyalty, qualities that Samuel hadn't realized he still had within himself. Dr. Collins filled in more pieces of Brave's story during one of their conversations. "We believe he was abandoned," she said. "There are signs he was used for labor, poorly fed, overworked, and those rabbits you found with him, he likely found them and decided to protect them, even at his own expense." Samuel was silent, his throat tightening. The idea of Brave, barely surviving himself, shielding two helpless creatures from the storm, struck a chord deep within him. As the days turned into weeks, Brave grew stronger. His coat regained its shine, and his frame filled out with proper care and nourishment. Samuel was there for every step of his recovery, learning how to brush him, feed him, and even speak to him in ways the horse seemed to understand. One afternoon, as Samuel prepared to leave the clinic, Dr. Collins stopped him. "You know, Samuel," she began carefully, "Brave needs a permanent home. He's grown attached to you. And honestly, I think you're just what he needs. Would you consider taking him in?" Samuel stared at her, the weight of her words settling over him. He had never owned a horse before. Margaret had always been the one with the green thumb and the love for animals. But the thought of leaving Brave to someone else felt wrong. "I'll do it," he said, his voice steady. "He's been through enough. I'll give him a home." Dr. Collins smiled warmly. "I think Brave just found his second chance." The day Samuel brought Brave home was crisp and sunny, the snow glistening under a bright blue sky. He'd spent the morning preparing the small barn on his property, clearing out old tools and laying fresh hay on the floor. The barn hadn't been used in years, but it now felt alive with purpose, a space waiting for its new occupant. When the trailer pulled up in front of his house, Samuel felt a surge of nervous excitement. Brave stepped out slowly, his hooves crunching softly against the snow. His coat gleamed in the sunlight, and his posture was strong and steady, a far cry from the frail, trembling animal Samuel had first seen in his yard. Brave turned his head toward Samuel, his ears flicking forward, and for a moment it felt as though they were communicating without words. "Welcome home, Brave," Samuel said, his voice catching slightly. "This is your place now." He led the horse to the barn, where Brave sniffed cautiously at his new surroundings. Samuel watched with a mix of pride and emotion as Brave settled in, his movements relaxed and unhurried. It was as if the horse knew he was finally safe. Over the next few weeks, Samuel and Brave fell into a rhythm. Samuel would rise early to feed and brush him, often talking to him about the day ahead. Brave, for his part, seemed to listen, his calm presence filling the once empty mornings with quiet companionship. For the first time in years, Samuel's days felt full. He started walking Brave around the property, discovering paths he hadn't explored since Margaret was alive. The horse's quiet strength seemed to invigorate Samuel, pushing him to move more, to embrace the outdoors even in the chill of winter. The rabbits, too, had become a part of this unexpected family. They now lived in a sturdy pen near the house, their once fragile frames plump and lively. Samuel often found Brave standing near the pen, his head lowered as though watching over them. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, Samuel stood by the fence, his hand resting on Brave's neck. He thought of the night they'd found each other, the desperation in Brave's eyes, and the way the storm had brought them together. "You saved those rabbits, you know," Samuel murmured, stroking Brave's mane. "And maybe you saved me too." The horse nickered softly, his warm breath visible in the cold air. The transformation in Samuel didn't go unnoticed. Emily, his young neighbor, stopped by one afternoon with a basket of muffins. She grinned as she watched Samuel lead Brave around the yard. "You look different," she said. "Happier?" Samuel chuckled. "Well, I've got my hands full now, don't I?" Emily nodded. "It's nice to see. You and Brave make a good team." That night, as Samuel sat by the fire with the rabbits at his feet and Brave resting in the barn, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. The loss of Margaret still lingered, but it no longer felt like an unbearable weight. Instead, it was a quiet presence, a reminder of the love that had shaped him and made him capable of opening his heart again. Brave wasn't just a horse. He was a survivor, a symbol of resilience and courage. And in saving Brave, Samuel had found his own strength, proving that even in the face of loss and loneliness, new beginnings were always possible. And so, Samuel's life was no longer defined by solitude but by connection, a bond forged in the heart of a storm that had changed everything.